Cool. Hey, good morning, guys. Welcome to the code session. In this session, what I'm going to talk about is basically using a Slackbot. So, how many of you guys actually use Slack at work? Super. How many of you guys use Network Insight? Okay, doesn't matter. but what I'm going to show you is actually not so much about what Network Insight does, and that's actually the point, so that you guys actually don't need to use Network Insight if the APIs are available, right? So if you want to query something, making it seamless for you guys. So I'm going to kind of show you how to build a Slackbot a little bit. I'll give you a little sample code so you can kind of get started if you want, and then also how we query the APIs, so some of the stuff behind it, right? So just a quick word on cloud services. So I'm part of a team that is at VMware called VMware Cloud Services. So I'm one of the technical cloud specialists here. Last year at VMworld, we announced a bunch of different SaaS services, and one of the services is actually Network Insight. So we're not going to talk a lot about the services themselves, but just to give you a quick idea of that. So Network Insight itself as a product can help you as you go through your journey to hybrid cloud or public cloud, and can help you with the assessment phase, with the deployment, migration. If you're trying to manage, operate, build hybrid clouds, whatever, and then also if you're fully in public cloud, there's a lot of different use cases. So if you want to chat about this, we can certainly do it after the session here. So I know you guys all love slides, so I'm going to go through about 40 slides. No, I'm not. But I'm going to just jump into a quick demo to actually show you what this is, and then we'll kind of come back to the piece and sort of walk through what it is, right? So the basic premise here is that you can use the Slack interface to actually build kind of on top of it and build a lot of stuff on top of it, right? So what I'm doing here is basically actually passing a Slack token, and you'll kind of understand what the Slack token is and all these things in a couple minutes. Basically, what I'm doing is I'm passing a Slack token, and I'm basically just starting a piece of code. So what I'm going to say is Slack token equals blah, and then I'm going to run my code. My code is actually written in Node.js. So I'm just going to say node, and the index.js is the file which actually has all the stuff in it. So I'll show you the file in a second, but just that's all I need to do from the command line, right? I just go and say pass the Slack token, and I say node, and I run the code. So what you see here is the RTM WebSocket is open. What that actually means is that the Slackbot has actually come alive. That's basically the way it creates that connection to a Slackbot, right? So once I've done that, I can go back into my Slack channel. So I have a Slack channel called Acme Fitness. This is our fictitious company that we run at VMware. So you can see down below there's a green thing that says Jarvis. So my Slackbot is actually called Jarvis. So Jarvis didn't die in the last Iron Man movie. He actually just made a reincarnation here. So what I can now go and say is something like @Jarvis hello. And he basically says, hey, he responds back with a hello with a robot face. I can say, Jarvis, call me by my name. So he now captures my name, and he's going to basically use that name every time I communicate with him. I can do something like Jarvis, say, give me a Chuck Norris joke, for example, right? So there's an API database for all Chuck Norris jokes. Yes, there is one out there. So you can go and do that. It'll basically go and pull a Chuck Norris joke for you. Every time it's going to post a Chuck Norris joke, right? This is all fun and games, so that's all good. But this is just to show you what you can do with a Slackbot in general. Now, in my tech channel, what I'm going to do is actually go and say, so I have a bunch of different EC2 instances that are running in Amazon today. So we have roughly over 200, 300 instances that run there. So assume someone comes and tells you, hey, Prabhu, what is this IP address, like in Amazon? Just tell me what this is. I don't have the time to go and search through it, right? So you can go to the Slackbot and basically say, whose IP address, and then give it the IP address, right? What it's going to do in the back end is actually going to go and query our Network Insight database to actually figure out, hey, who does this actually map to? What it comes back is with two entities. So one is the entity ID. Entity ID is like an internal identifier for that actual entity in Network Insight. And it actually goes and tells me what that actually maps to in Amazon, right? So it tells me that IP address actually maps to this host name in Amazon at this point. So just to show you that this is actually not canned data, it actually is running some form of dynamic lookups and stuff like that. So I'm going to just go and query another IP address. I'm going to go and say, hey, look up this one for a change. So it's going to say, got it. I'm going to go look this up. You get the entity ID, and you also get the actual host name from Amazon now. Let's try it again. Let's give it something else. Let's say whose IP address. This time around, I'll throw something else at it. So this is just to give you an idea that you can actually you can build pretty much whatever you want. There's a ton of things you can do with the API, but you can start building a lot of different things on top of it, right? So if you haven't seen, another thing that we launched at this year's VMworld was our, before we go to that, just want to show you that this actually does map to something in the backend. So I'm going to go into the Network Insight UI and look for that specific database UI that I got there, and it basically maps to that same IP address, right? So I didn't even, like you guys said you don't use Network Insight, but did you have to use Network Insight? You actually didn't. You can use the API to actually create that for you, right? That's the power of using something like this. So let's flip over to another use case just to give you a sense of like how you can use APIs to actually drive some additional use cases, for example, right? So another example is we launched our Kubernetes engine this year at VMworld, right? So Kubernetes engine is our SaaS-based service for providing you clusters. So in this example, I have no clusters in my folder right now. I don't have any Kubernetes clusters created. So what I can do is I can go to the same Slackbot that I had, and I'm using the Kubernetes engine API for a change, and I'm going to go and say, hey Jarvis, go and build me 3 clusters in my folder. That's it. I'm not even saying anything else. It's literally that simple. I can go and say, because everything is coded into the actual code that I've written. So basically it's going to say, yep, I got it. I'm going to create 3 clusters for you called foo. So I flip back to my folder, refresh the page, and you know what? I have 3 clusters now running. I have foo0, foo1, and foo2. So it's super simple. You can actually create a Slackbot to actually do pretty much anything you want. So how did this actually all really come together? So now you're probably interested, okay, what is the magic sauce behind this, right? So let's flip over to the slides for a second, and I'll kind of walk you through some basic stuff that you need. So first and foremost, if you want to try this, it's available on my Git repo, so you can find my Git repo there. Feel free to download it. A good disclaimer, it's not the cleanest piece of code, so if you see something that you need me to modify, you need me to try again, happy to do it. So reach out to me via Twitter, email, whatever. So in order for you to try some of the stuff that I showed you today, there are a couple things you'll need. So number one is obviously a trial of Network Insight. So if you want to trial Network Insight service or the VKE service that I showed you, you can go to cloud.vmware.com. Sign up is super easy. Click on request trial, and you'll get a portal back and saying you're ready to go. For Network Insight, you'll need a couple data sources because you need some data in the system, obviously, right? So you need to either throw some vCenter accounts at it or AWS accounts at it. You will need you need a Slack workspace, right? So obviously, the Slack workspace requires an OAuth token. The OAuth token is the way it actually will create that communication, and that's how we are able to connect into that Slack service, right? So you need that OAuth token. So if you're not the Slack administrator in your environment, try to get one. If not, just get a free Slack workspace. That's the easiest way to do it, right? The code itself here is written in Node version 8.11, and I'll show you some other stuff as well. So this also is available as a container. So if you guys just want to take this and run it as a Docker container instead of running it locally from your machine, I can show you how that is set up. If you want to take that and run it in Kubernetes, totally, I can show you guys how that is done, but in interest of time, we'll kind of stick to what this is. How does the API actually work? So for Network Insight, the API is REST API based. There are a couple of things you will need. You'll need a authentication token, obviously. Similar to what Slack does, you need an authentication token. And we basically exchange it using the Swagger API to get a user access token. All of this is documented in the page. I'll show you the page in a couple minutes. So how does this actually interact? How does the interaction model actually look, right? So basically the user, so in my case, me as the user, I go and say, if there is a direct mention of Jarvis, or if direct message to Jarvis, he basically will pick that up. And then based on what he's hearing, there's a function that runs behind it. In our case, it either will hit whenever he hears Chuck Norris, in that case, it will go and query the Chuck Norris database API. If he needs to go and create a Kubernetes cluster, he will basically hear, hey, I want to build X number of Kubernetes clusters, go hit it against the Kubernetes API. If I want to use X number of this, it'll go and hit the Network Insight API. So you can actually build this to pretty much anything you guys have in your environment. I'm just showing you 2 examples here. So that's basically what it is. Now, how does this work under the hood? This is super good, informative that, there's a lot of work that has already been actually done for us, to be very honest. The code itself leverages some out-of-the-box node modules. So there's a node module that's called Slackbots. So you can basically download that, and that's what actually provides the here's function, basically. So every time you can just do a controller here's function, and then it will do whatever you need it to do. I'm also leveraging another node module called Axios. Axios is actually the one that is running the actual API. It's running the actual get and post API call. So if you've ever used Postman, you can go and say, click down and say, hey, get this API endpoint. Here I'm basically going to use the axios.get function, and I'll show you how this looks in the code, and that's how it actually works. In order to run the code itself, like I showed you in the past, you basically say you pass the Slack token, and then you do a run node blah, whatever that file name is, right? And when you run that, that's when it connects to the Slack service, and upon hearing the trigger words, the appropriate API kind of gets called. When you get the API back, it basically will return an array. And basically, we parse that array and pull whatever information we want out of it. So in closing, I'll say, this is basically just show you what the possibility is. Code is pretty basic at this point. If you guys want to take a look, you saw it on the Git repo there. But I'll kind of just give you a quick rundown of what the code actually looks like in the back end. So just to show you, so in this case, you hear the controller here's function, and every time this function is called, I say bot reply with a smiley cat or with a robot face. In this case, the Chuck Norris API is basically down. It's down below. But basically, you saw the call me function that I said. Whenever the controller hears call me and there's a star, that's my name, or any variable you want to pass, it's going to store that, and the bot's going to reply with something else. When it hears get VKE cluster, it's going to run a certain API. So that's how this is basically set up. It's set up in functions. The controller hears is really what triggers it off, and the Axios get and Axios post basically go and run the appropriate API. So with that, again, thank you guys. Appreciate the time. I'll be around for a couple more minutes. So if you guys want to chat about this code or anything related to this, come find me. So thank you very much. Appreciate the time. Have a good rest of the conference. Thank you.